And I can remember out loud in my room, just to no one, saying, "Oh my God, my life is a Lifetime movie."
A lifelong secret finally revealed after more than 50 years. A man confesses he wasn't just a father, he was a fugitive. It was a crime that captivated Cleveland, a bank heist in the heart of the city. But there were no guns or getaway cars, no safe cracking or hostages, no note passed to a terrified teller.
It's been portrayed as one of Cleveland's coldest cases ever.
It was an inside job committed by essentially a kid.
He didn't have any fear. The VP's in the bullpen. Stands there and talks to me for 20 minutes with the money in his hand.
Wow.
And I mean, the guy had big brass ones.
He pulled it off flawlessly, then just vanished.
At the beginning of it all, investigators were on him, but he disappeared in thin air.
Ted Conrad remained the city's most infamous fugitive for half a century. It's Cleveland's Thomas Crown affair. I'm Jen Picciano, and this is Dark Side of the Land. The name Ted Conrad may not ring a bell to you, but his story will. July 11th, 1969. It was just a day after his 20th birthday. Conrad walked into the vault of Society National Bank where he worked as a teller and coolly and casually walked out the same door with $215,000 in cash. That's the equivalent of $1.8 million today. He fled and was never found. Poof, gone. Conrad eluded police, the FBI, and a deputy U.S. Marshal who made Conrad his nemesis for decades.
Sometimes in life, to motivate you, you have to create your own enemies.
He sent a couple of letters and made contact a few times in the days after the crime. But after that, no one heard from Ted Conrad ever again. He walked away from family, friends, a girlfriend, leaving no trace, no trail, and seemingly no regrets. Despite the lack of leads or any confirmed sightings, investigators in Northeast Ohio refused to let up.
We started a cold case squad in my office, and we focused on the Conrad case. This was kept alive and kept important for my father, who never, stopped working it, all the way through. My father had flown to different states to follow up on this case.
Years, then decades went by, but that deputy U.S. Marshal and his son, who followed in his footsteps, continued to fight to pursue Conrad, not wanting him to get away with what appeared to be the perfect crime. All the while, they were frustrated at the way the crime was glamorized and the way his friends back in Cleveland seemed to cheer him on.
He was fixated with Thomas Crown affair, and so on. And I think that led up to him taking this money. It was more or less a dare for him.
Ted Conrad was on the lam for more than 50 years. He changed his name, lived a whole other life, undetected. He kept his crime a secret from everyone until he made a deathbed confession to the last two people he wanted to know about his past.
My dad said, "Ladies, just in case it ever comes up, when I moved here, I had to change my name. The authorities are probably still looking for me. And I just wanted you to know that in case it ever comes up." And then we went right back to watching NCIS.
His family discovered he was hiding something more than just his criminal past.
Honestly, the worst secret he's kept for me is not even the secret of him being a fugitive.
We're bringing Conrad's daughter, Ashley, to the scene of the crime inside the very same bank vault that he stole from. And she'll walk in her father's footsteps to try and unpack why he committed such an infamous bank job and to get to know the man who was Ted Conrad. It was July of 1969. Richard Nixon was president. U.S. military presence in Vietnam had peaked, and the first withdrawals of American troops were taking place.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
The country was preparing for Apollo 11 to launch from Cape Kennedy for the historic first moon landing with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. 19-year-old Ted Conrad had returned to Cleveland after a brief stint at New England College. He graduated from Lakewood High School in 1969. And when he came back to Northeast Ohio, he picked right back up with friends from Lakewood, like Russ Metcalf.
He is probably one of the nicest individuals I'd ever known. We did a lot together. We double dated a lot. And, we just got to be friends. We'd shoot pool together. He was quite a pool shark.
Ted and Russ palled around a lot together. They both worked at downtown banks, Russ at Union Commerce Bank and Ted at Society National Bank, right in Public Square. The two of them would meet up for lunch breaks. They'd golf on weekends and often catch a movie together.
It was at a movie theater out in Rocky River, near what used to be called Westgate Mall.
One of the movies they saw together, The Thomas Crown Affair. It's a bank heist movie with Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway. By some accounts, Conrad saw it as many as a dozen times.
He had a girlfriend in high school. I'd see it with him 5 times.
Russ said Ted began taking on the persona of McQueen's Thomas Crown character.
He thought it was cool. I mean, once he saw it, he started, one of the things in Thomas Crown Affair, he wears kind of a tweed jacket with a turtleneck. Well, Ted started dressing like that. He saw Steve McQueen, of course, all of us did back then, as the epitome of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Good-looking girls all around you, fast cars, lots of money.
Metcalf says Ted even got his grandmother to loan him the money to buy an MG Midget sports car. The two of them spent time together tooling around in their fast cars, shooting pool and shooting the breeze about their jobs.
I mean, this is the first real job either one of us had had.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about our jobs, and he said, I'm really shocked at how loose the security is. And so that's when he started saying, I could walk out of there with a ton of money, nobody'd ever know.
Did you take him seriously?
We joked about it. I didn't take him seriously at all, but he would joke about it and say, yeah, I can do that. It'd be so easy. And I could disappear and get on a sailboat and nobody'd ever see me again. He thought that was cool. And
more like he was describing a fantasy than a real plot or plan.
I think he was, like I said, he's a smart guy. I think he was talking about, if I were gonna do this, here's what I'd do. And it was kind of like Thomas Crown. He plans Crown planned his capers very well. This went on for a long time. And I'd always play it down and say, well, no, but you'd lose your family. And he says, I don't really care.
Turns out those conversations weren't just fantasy. The day after Ted's 20th birthday, the pair of friends met up for burgers during their lunch hour at the Flaming Embers restaurant. That's right next to another downtown bank, National City on Euclid Avenue.
We got through and I said, well, you want to play golf tomorrow? I said, I have to work in the morning, but I'll come by and pick you up at the apartment and we'll go play golf. He said, that'd be great. He says, I got to go down to the state store. And so he left, shook hands.
That was the last time Russ ever saw Ted. After lunch, Ted reportedly went to a liquor store downtown, picked up a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey and a carton of cigarettes, and he went back to work at Society National Bank. Ted was a teller at a prestigious bank in Cleveland. It's been there in the same location on the northeast corner of Public Square since 1890. It's grand and beautiful inside, opulent even, almost church-like, with stained glass Tiffany window panes at the ceiling and hand-painted walls, so detailed you'd think it was wallpaper. The 2-story lobby has these columns and a massive island in the center, built of imported marble. In 1969, there would have been more than a dozen tellers working there at once. This was a busy, buzzing banking hub at the time. Ted was a vault teller there, and he decided today was the day he was finally going to do what he'd been talking about, rob the bank, by helping himself to the piles of money he worked with.
Conrad went into the bank with a paper bag, took $215,000 out, put a carton of cigarettes and I believe a bottle of whiskey on top of that bag and walked out the door and was never seen again.
That's U.S. Marshal Pete Elliott, who made it his mission to solve the Conrad case. There are accounts that Conrad used the same paper bag he walked in with, the one that had his booze and his smokes in it, to carry the cash out, the equivalent of $1.8 million.
There was a big bullpen And to get in the cash vault, you had to go into the bullpen and walk down the stairs.
Russ remembers the layout of Society National Bank with a vault in the floor below the lobby and most of the activity, including supervisors that Ted had to get past upstairs.
One of the VPs of the bank, Ted walks up into the bullpen. The VP's in the bullpen, stands there and talks to me for 20 minutes with the money in his hand.
Wow.
And I mean, the guy had big brass ones.
So cool and calm, so Steve McQueen of him, right? Technically, it wasn't robbery, it was embezzlement since he worked at the bank. It's not as if he didn't belong there. This wasn't a stick-up.
Right. He was definitely worked there. He planned it out for a while. From what we learned after the fact, he was talking about how easy it would be to walk out of that bank with cash, with nobody basically knowing. Back in those days, a lot was different. They didn't even take fingerprints of the people that worked in that bank. There was easy access to the vaults, easy access to everything.
Pete Elliott's father, John Elliott, was the deputy U.S. Marshal for the Northern District of Ohio when Conrad stole from the bank. The crime was sort of a cloud over the Elliott family. How old were you when you first heard the name Ted Conrad?
Well, I had to be about 7 years old in 1969.
How was it brought up? Was his name infamous? Was he a villain? Was it lore?
I can remember the days of my father, being at the dinner table and saying, hey, pass the mashed potatoes, and when am I going to get Ted Conrad? So he was fixated on Conrad ever since the beginning. So basically, ever since Conrad pulled this off in July of 1969, all through the 1970s, 1980s. We grew up in Lakewood, Ohio, and that's where Conrad was living. And my father took the case personally since the beginning. He, Conrad used to work at the local malt shop, which my dad used to take us in as kids. Conrad had the same doctor that my father had at one point. Conrad went to Lakewood High School, which was right in the heart of our town. And he used to work at a Miller's restaurant, which my grandparents used to take us to in our younger days. So, for my father, it was always personal.
Conrad took the money on a Friday afternoon, so he got a 3-day jump on disappearing before the missing money was discovered Monday morning. By then, it was pretty clear Conrad was the one behind the shortage, but he was long gone. A taxi driver told police he'd picked up Ted from his Clifton Avenue apartment and took him to Hopkins International Airport in Cleveland, but they never discovered where he traveled to from there.
Monday morning, probably about 9:30, I'm at my office and I'm at my job in the bank and get a phone call from one of our buddies who also worked at Society. He said, Russ, have you seen Ted? I said, no, we're supposed to play golf this weekend, and we didn't. He says, well, he hadn't shown up for work. And he says there's a shortage in the vault.
Pretty soon, Conrad's close friend Russ got a visit at his own bank from a couple of G-men.
And there are two guys sitting there in suits. And I looked at him, I said, you're from the FBI. How much money did he get? And I was just joking. He said, how did you know? And so I was a smart ass back then. So I spent 2 hours with the feds.
Now, Russ says he was in the dark about where Ted was and never heard from him again. Conrad did send letters to his then-girlfriend, Kathy, with postmarks from Washington, D.C. and California. Pete Elliott read one to us.
My darling Kathy, it's another lonely night without my family and friends. I wish with all my heart that I could be with you now, but I guess in time you'll be happier this way. I wish I could tell you where I am. It's best you do not know.
But after those initial letters, he cut off all contact. Meanwhile, back in Lakewood, Ted Conrad, already a well-liked guy, became a legend.
But he was also looked at back then as kind of and I think this is probably what agitated my father also, is he was looked at as kind of a hero. And, I think at one point, certain kids put up in their front yard, "Run, Ted, run."
I wish I still had the T-shirt. I had a T-shirt that said "Run, Ted, run."
They looked at him as kind of a Robin Hood in some ways, being able to take the money and get away with it.
Well, and he wasn't a Robin Hood. I mean, we don't really know what happened to the money, do we?
We don't know what happened to the money.
I'm Jen Picciano, and this is Dark Side of the Land. What happened right away after he left?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on, and again, it's the summer of 1969.
Right.
So a lot of things were going on in life. But there was bulletins put out on him, internationally. We knew he had contacts in France over the years and in other places. So there was a lot going on in the summer of 69. But he pretty much dropped into thin air at the end of the day and just disappeared.
In Cleveland and across the country, there was an all-out manhunt for Conrad, led by Deputy Marshal John Elliott.
And that stayed consistent through the 70s and through the 80s, through the 90s and 2000s. So everybody, it was one of Cleveland's biggest mysteries. They wrote books on this, what happened to Theodore J. Conrad. And throughout the years, we put him on Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted. Had a number of tips that came in through all those shows, but nothing was ever coming together, over all those years. We always imagined Conrad would be on a island somewhere with fast cars, with lots of money, with gold, and, it turned out to be the total opposite.
Turns out, Conrad wasn't living it up, swimming in piles of money on some remote, exotic island. He was living in plain sight in Boston the whole time.
What we do know now is within 6 months of him fleeing, he went to the Boston area and assumed the identity of Thomas Randele with an address in Boston with a new Social Security number, a new name, and a new life.
How did he pull that off? How did he do that? He just walked up and said, "I need a new Social Security." Like, what was he able to do?
Walk into the Social Security Administration back then in Boston and come up with a whole different name and Social Security number and walk out that door as that person. So they issued a Social Security number to him in 1970. He's a young kid. Probably went in there and said, "I forgot, don't have a Social Security number. This is my name. This is my date of birth." So on and so on, and was able to walk back out the door as Thomas Randele. He lived in the Boston area. Ironically, he lived right where the Thomas Crown Affair was filmed.
Really?
Right on Beacon Street, I believe it was.
Do you think that was a coincidence?
I believe he took the name Thomas because of Thomas Crown.
Conrad made a common choice among fugitives who assume a new identity. He used the same date of birth and just changed the year from 1949 to 1947. He took the nest egg he'd stolen for himself to start anew. And he did just that. He got an apartment, made friends, dated girls. By the late 70s, he was married to a woman named Kathy and had a daughter, Ashley, in the early 80s. He played a lot of golf, even rising to semi-pro tour level play, and he sold cars at a local Volvo dealer. Ashley describes her parents' marriage as very loving and her childhood pretty idyllic.
I think at the time I very much took for granted that I had two really involved and invested parents. My dad did work very long hours at the car dealership, but he made sure to drive me to school every day.
She said he had a perfectly simple and tragic explanation for why nothing was ever said about his past.
What we always knew was that Dad was an only child. His parents had died in a car crash when he was 18, and he didn't have any other family. He didn't have aunts or uncles or any close cousins, and it was just too heartbreaking to stay living where he had grown up. And it was also too heartbreaking to take anything with him. He always said he just packed a suitcase with the essentials, left, and moved to Boston because he just wanted to get away.
And so you thought he came from Colorado. There was never any mention of Cleveland, Ohio, or any time here. It was just tragic and sad enough not to ask any questions. Back then, people weren't documenting sad stories like that on social media or in newspapers, and no one was looking this all up to see if Ted or Tom's story checked out. Any money he had back then, he claimed came from his parents' life insurance policy. Ashley said he didn't come off secretive, just sad.
The only real memory that he talked about was in reference to his mom and how she was this amazing musician. And he would always say that that's where I get my musical ability from. I play the piano. I played the clarinet for a quick second in middle school, and then I studied classical voice. And he would always say, you get this talent from my mom. And he would describe being a child, and his mom would have rehearsals at their home. And they would be in the living room rehearsing, and he would sit on the stairs that went up to the second floor, and he would just sit and listen to her play.
The Randele family was tight-knit, spending Sundays, Tom's only day off, together. They lived modestly in Lynnfield, Massachusetts, a charming suburb of Boston, in Kathy's childhood home. By all accounts, from friends, his wife, his daughter, and coworkers, there were no red flags about the way Tom lived his life. He didn't shy away from photographs, but he did have facial hair, a beard he had his whole life, which provided some cover, and he never wanted to travel.
In high school, I had the opportunity to go to France through the school. So it was subsidized through the school. Parents could be chaperoned, also at a subsidized rate. So my mom said, 100% I'm going, because we could never have afforded to leave the country. Like, we just didn't have that kind of money. And my mom said, Tom, you should come too. And he super relaxed said, I don't really want to go to Europe. You girls go and have so much fun. I'll just stay home with the cat.
Ted didn't have a passport because he needed both a social security card and a birth certificate under the fake name Tom Randele, but he only had the social security card. If there was one thing that bothered Ashley about her dad, it was his smoking. He was a lifetime smoker of menthol cigarettes.
In February, March of 2021, my dad was diagnosed with a really aggressive form of lung cancer. And he had started chemo, and right after that first chemo treatment, it knocked him for a loop. I had never seen him that sick. And I think that's when he realized, maybe I won't have a few years. I think I probably have less time.
Tom declined quickly and must have come to realize he was nearing the end of his life. So Ashley says he knew it was time to tell the two most important people in his life his big secret. But true to his character as Ted and Tom, he was cool and calm, nonchalant really, in his delivery, despite the gravity of what he was about to reveal.
And he said, ladies, just in case something ever comes up, I don't want you to be blindsided, but I changed my name when I moved here, and the authorities might still be looking for me, just in case that ever comes up. And then went back to watching TV. And
just like that?
Just like he had said, oh, by the way, if you're looking for it, I put the extra sleeve of Diet Dr. Pepper in the other fridge, just in case you're looking for it. Don't want you to be confused. And for a moment, or maybe like a few moments, I thought, what a weird dad joke. Like, are you trying to break the kind of sadness that's looming over our house with this weird joke? And then I realized that he was not joking. And so it was the next day I went to him, and I think Mom was out. And I said, so if this is true, if you really did change your name when you moved here, because you did something, obviously, if the authorities might still be looking for you. I said, so then your name isn't Tom Randele. So my name isn't Ashley Randele. And you're my dad, and I deserve to know your name. And then I deserve to know my name, essentially. And then he shared his name with me and had asked me not to Google it.
But come on, if a bombshell like that was dropped on you, wouldn't you Google it?
And of course, later that night, I can't sleep. It's probably 2 a.m. I'm alone in my bedroom.
Who can sleep after that bombshell?
You can't. Maybe somebody could, but I could not.
Yeah.
And so I first Googled, I think I just Googled Ted Conrad, and there were some things. And then I thought, well, if people are looking for him, he must have gone missing. So I put in Ted Conrad missing, and then it was just a page of like bank teller robs bank, fugitive still on the run. Because there were articles from within there were older articles, but there were articles like within the past decade.
Yeah.
And I just went down a rabbit hole that night reading. And I can remember out loud in my room, just to no one, saying, "Oh my God, my life is a Lifetime movie."
The next day, Ashley fessed up to her father that she'd read up on his crime and his life as a fugitive and convinced him that his wife, Kathy, deserved to know the whole truth.
I went upstairs and I told Mom, I said, "Dad told me his name and we're just gonna pull it up on your iPad and I'm gonna have you read. I'll sit next to you, but I can't even tell you because it's bonkers."
Oh, jeez.
I was like, "I can't. I'm sorry. I can't." And she
did her jaw hit the floor when
she sat there? So many people have asked, like, your mom must have known, right? Like, how could she not? If you could have seen her face the moment that search page loaded on her iPad, and she just kept saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." We could have sat there for 10 minutes. We could have sat there for an hour. I don't really know.
After your mom and you discovered what his name was and what had happened, what he had done, did you ask questions? Or did you respect his privacy still? And was it burning inside of you to know and to ask what the heck happened?
Yeah,
why?
I think that for us, what made it easier to be able to talk about it was when we came to him together and said, we both know, we have read all these articles, and not to say it's fine, right? But to say, this doesn't change how we feel about you. Like, this doesn't change the life that we had, but we want you to be able to talk about it. The look of relief, it really, that look when somebody's shoulders like fully relax and you can see their face soften. Carrying a secret like that for 50 years, keeping it from everybody, from your wife, from your child, and to finally have it be revealed and in that moment be met with the two people that you were probably worried about disappointing the most, to have them say, "We love you, you're still my husband, you're still my dad." None of that changes, I think, was a huge relief for him.
Sure.
To then be able to talk about it.
Ashley started filling up a notebook with questions, so many things she wanted to know about.
I can also remember asking him, how could you never tell Mom? Like, I can sort of maybe understand not telling your kid, but how? And he had said that he'd always wanted to, but when is the right time? And if you really, you're a wanted fugitive, you're not going to tell your girlfriend. What if she turns on you, right? What if she turns you in? But then you get married and you've only been married a little bit, and what a bomb to drop. And then it just kept getting later and later. And then you've been together for 25 years. And then how do you tell somebody that you've kept this huge secret?
But despite this enormous truth bomb detonated in their household, it didn't consume them. You see, the Randels were still in the throes of Tom's cancer treatments, and he was in a lot of pain some days. They were also broke and had filed for bankruptcy. And oh, by the way, this was all playing out inside the first year of the global COVID pandemic. Things were scary. So remarkably, Tom's secret of being a fugitive for 50 plus years wasn't actually the biggest thing they had to worry about at the time.
Certainly not to minimize this huge secret being revealed, but I can remember in that moment thinking, one more thing to just add to this list of crazy that's happening right now.
In his final days, Ashley and Kathy refrained from peppering Tom with too many questions about the robbery and his life as Ted Conrad.
And to also not want to spend every day talking about that when there are other conversations you want to be happening, when you're realizing that somebody you love is very sick. And from the time that he was diagnosed with cancer to the day he died was less than 2 months. So it was incredibly fast and just like super heartbreaking. And something that I always found really just endearing about my dad was when he told us that first afternoon in the living room. He wasn't telling us to get it off his chest because he really didn't tell us much until
Sure.
I'd pushed.
He was prepping you
But
and your mom,
he
right?
told us because he was worried about us that he was going to be gone and that there was going to be a knock on the door one day and we would be completely blindsided.
The man they knew as Tom Randele died on May 18th, 2021. Ashley and her mom agreed that after they allowed themselves a year to grieve, they would go to the authorities. By then, they knew all about John and Pete Elliott and wanted them to be able to close the case once and for all. I'm Jen Picciano, and this is Dark Side of the Land. That knock on the door, the one Tom worried about, it came before Ashley and Kathy were ready. You see, somebody sent Pete Elliott, Tom Randele's obituary, somebody who saw the clues it contained and connected the dots.
So when people lie, they lie close to home. It's never failed. So we looked at an obituary, and the obituary was from Thomas Randele. And in the obituary, Thomas Randele, his date of birth again, he used was July 10th of 1947. We knew Conrad's was July 10th of 1949. The photograph, obituary photo, really, you couldn't tell if that was the guy that, disappeared at 20 years old or the guy who died on paper at 73. So he listed that he grew up in Denver. We knew that Conrad grew up in Denver. He listed that he went to New England College. Now remember, sitting in my office is the application from New England College, where we know that Conrad went to school. He listed his parents as Ed and Ruthabeth Kruger Randele. His parents' real names were Ed and Ruthabeth Kruger Conrad. So we had all these similarities that were adding up, and that's really what kind of like put us to pulling up documents from the bankruptcy and looking at those bankruptcy documents compared to the signatures that we had on file from Conrad. So we knew we were in the right ballpark, at least going to that house, that day.
So was it good old-fashioned police work, trolling obituaries for people about his age, or was it a tip that led you to that obituary?
So there was somebody that led us to take a look at that obituary and, said, take a look at this, and so on.
Are you going to take that secret to the grave?
I am going to take that secret to the grave. We hopped in a car, myself and Eric Mydock, who was part of my cold case group, and drove to Boston, and then knocked on the door and went in that house.
What is the response you get at their house?
Well, I can still remember, and it was a nice day out, really great suburb of Boston. Myself and Eric Mydock, I said, Eric, let me do the talking. I said, I know this is in my head. I've been dealing with it for decades and decades.
Did you rehearse this? No. Okay.
But you never know what you're going to do until you see the reaction of others. So I can remember knocking at the door, and Kathy opened the door, Ted's wife, and I identified myself as Pete Elliott, U.S. Marshal from Northern Ohio. And can I talk to you for a minute? And she said, okay, and she let us in the door. We sat down in the living room. I've never seen so many bills piled up in my life. There were bills everywhere. I saw an NCIS hat that was over in the corner. It was just cluttered with bill after bill after bill after bill. And I remember Kathy coming down the stairs after she went to get Ashley, and she said, well, maybe I should go get my attorney. And I said, Kathy, I'm not here for you. I'm here because I believe your husband was somebody else.
Marshal Elliott is a good judge of character and a straight shooter. He told me he found Ashley and Kathy to be honest and forthcoming.
They said before he died that his real name was Ted Conrad, and he took all that money.
And at that moment, was it relief? Was it satisfaction? As an investigator, as somebody who goes after fugitives, this is a fugitive for decades.
Yeah,
What's that moment for you?
It was weird, if I could put it that way. It wasn't what I was expecting. I expected, here's my dad's, arch enemy in life. The guy that's supposed to be on an island, supposed to be, with all this money, supposed to have all this. And I saw a family that was broke with bills piled up everywhere, a man that died of lung cancer who filed for bankruptcy. And it was a whole different story than I ever imagined when I was 7 and 8 and 10 and 15 and 20 and 25 growing up. It was a whole different world than I expected. Doesn't end up like the movies.
For Elliot, the moment was bittersweet. The case that had consumed his father was finally closed. But John Elliott didn't live to see Conrad brought to justice. He died a little more than a year prior.
We always talked about, I was going to take even after my dad retired, once we identified where Conrad was, my dad was going to go and he was going to be the one to put the handcuffs on.
I mean, was he obsessed? Is it safe to say he was obsessed with the case?
Yeah, he was definitely obsessed with the Conrad case.
That conversation in the Randles' living room was the starting point of a project of discovery for Ashley. She embarked on a year-long podcast project herself with audio documentary producer Jonathan Hirsch.
There was something so perfect about the way it was constructed, right? Like criminal mastermind, inspired by the Thomas Crown affair, scoops up the equivalent of $1.8 million, walks out of Society National Bank the day after his 20th birthday and is never seen again.
In Smokescreen, My Fugitive Dad, the pair set about trying to answer some burning questions, like why did he do it? Was it just because he could? What happened to the money? And were Tom Randele and Ted Conrad the same guy?
Tom and Ted are both the same man, but also principally different than one another.
Now, the fact is, Tom may have had more history in Boston, but this is a Cleveland crime. And we were in a unique position here in Cleveland to help Ashley literally walk in her father's footsteps as she attempted to get answers after her father passed away.
How are you feeling about seeing this history of your dad today? Do you have big feelings about today and tomorrow?
I don't know. I was like, this could either be just really cool and neat and what an opportunity to come. But then also it could just go sideways and be very, very emotional.
We brought Ashley to Cleveland and Lakewood, where Ted Conrad last lived. Lakewood is a suburb immediately to the west of Cleveland along the shore of Lake Erie. It's lined with large old homes, many that have been converted to duplexes and multifamily homes. But back in 1969, it was populated with baby boomers who filled the halls of Lakewood High School.
I pulled the yearbooks out for you.
Awesome. You know what I like? It smells like old yearbooks in this
I was
room.
just about to say, I love how they smell.
Right?
And this smells like my basement, which I love.
The Lakewood Education Association pulled the 2 yearbooks that Ted Conrad had appeared in to let Ashley have a look. After all, she really never got to see any photos of her dad from when he was younger.
Let's just discuss that I started in the R's and went, no, go to the C's. I went right to the
Randall.
I went right to the R's. Oh, goodness.
302, 78, and 145. Go for it.
Oh, so this is by class.
It's by homeroom.
By homeroom, okay.
What did it say, 78?
Well, now part of me's
Can you find him?
Is that him? If it is, I'm going to be really proud of myself.
It's certainly, all right, let's see.
Okay.
Front row. It goes by front row. So is he that?
So row 4,
1, 2,
Theodore Con.
I
found
him!
So proud. I thought that I wouldn't, and then I'd feel badly. Oh, he's so handsome in his little suit.
You picked him right out.
I did. Oh. And then we'll see if I can find him again. The German Club.
And what is it about 17-year-old dad? I don't know whether I'm supposed to call him Ted or Tom to you.
Either, honestly, I sometimes refer to him as Ted pre the crime because he was, but I'm not offended either way.
He was on
He was on student council.
That's right. That's him, right?
Yeah, but he look like, he looks different. That's the one where I was like, it sort of looks like it could be him.
Ooh, yearbooks.
We set those dusty yearbooks aside and read an email that came to the Alumni Association, written for Ashley by a friend, a classmate.
So it says, "Hi, Terry. I would like Ted's daughter to know what he was like in high school and as a friend. All of us loved him. Ted was a bit shy at first, but when you got to know him, he was a blast. He had the utmost respect for the girls. Gotta love that. We all wondered where he went after the bank robbery. It was like he dropped off the face of the earth. The FBI came to my house twice asking if I knew where he was. After he died, we all knew where he was. It was a sigh of relief for me. Don't get me wrong. What he did was a federal offense that could have landed him in jail for life. I am glad he was happily married, had a child, a nice home, and deeply loved. Ted deserved that. R.I.P. Ted. From Ruth Henney, LHS, class of 67.
So this is it.
This is the house?
I took her by the home on Bonneview in Lakewood, where her father lived with his mother, Ruthabeth Marsh, and his stepdad, Ray, and his brothers.
She came here because this, like at the time, well-known conductor was starting something here or taking over for one of the symphonies and wanted her to come.
We took photos on the porch to commemorate the occasion. From there, we took a short drive north to Clifton Boulevard to find Ted's last apartment in Cleveland. It's where the cab driver picked him up to take him to the airport. It's a 16-unit brick building on the north side of a busy street. It's in the Edgewater neighborhood on the border of Lakewood and Cleveland.
This doesn't look like it's changed much, does it?
No, I feel like this looks exactly the way it did when he lived here.
Do you know anything about this place or this time from him? I mean, this was the last place he left.
Well, and what's so interesting is, so there are the stories that they came and his car wasn't here, right? And it was parked like across the street. So I bet his car was parked on that street. They said it was parked on, like you could see his car from the apartment building.
It may or may not surprise you that the stop on our Ted Conrad's Cleveland tour that really made Ashley feel closest to her dad was the bank. Yeah, that bank. Society National Bank, now Key Bank. The bank.
Whoa.
Wow.
Look at this place.
This is a bank?
Right? It's beautiful, huh?
Oh my gosh. It's like a palace.
What do you think of this place? I mean,
It's astounding. Like it could be a museum. This is gorgeous. I can't imagine working here every day.
I had to knock on the right doors, so to speak, but we got through to the right people who let us into the bank that Ted Conrad robbed after hours. The bank is across from the old stone church in Public Square, which basically is downtown Cleveland's front door. The exterior terracotta-colored sandstone, it's original, and the bank branch is contained within Key Tower, a skyscraper that was built around it. They kept the lights on and the alarms off so we could look around and literally walk in Ted Conrad's footsteps.
are you familiar with what this would have looked like in 1969?
Yeah, you're almost looking identically at it.
Our after-hours tour guide is John Burdorf, a senior vice president at Key Bank. Now, it's a requirement of bank leadership to know about this branch. It's been on the National Registry of Historical Places since the 1970s.
Your dad would have worked right here.
Is that where the vault was before?
So it's in the exact same spot. So, the nature of the event that occurred, we can show you the route he would have taken to go down to the main vault and come back up.
The tellers who work there today are plenty familiar with Ted Conrad's story.
Well, what are we looking at now? How similar is it to what it looked like in 1969?
Yeah, so I would say that it's extremely similar. I mean, much of this is original from when the branch was built back in 1890. So he would have worked, potentially in one of these workstations.
Back then, and even now, this is a prestigious place to work. A tour of this branch is part of the onboarding for new bank employees, and even included in many city tours. They're about to celebrate their 200th anniversary. This is as old Cleveland as it gets.
We got real quiet.
Yep.
John led us down the stairs into the vault area, the same stairs Ted would have used to get down to his post, and the staircase he walked back up carrying the stolen cash.
Oh my goodness.
Ashley's eyes got wide, still surprised that they let the bank robber's daughter in the vault.
Wow. Wow. This is a massive door.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
And the vault doors are actually the original vault doors from 1890.
If these walls could talk, right?
I don't know if I thought it would be bigger or smaller.
Not sure.
I don't know. Maybe I thought it would be bigger. I don't know what vaults look like.
So that vault was actually used for currency, but also like gold and silver because they were still dealing in gold and silver stuff, so there'd be gold and silver bars down here as well.
So what would this have looked like back in like 69?
Well, I would imagine very similar.
My guess is these were original vaults
Probably
that
the
were
one
used
that
for
stored the cash.
Yeah.
Now, there weren't piles of money or stacks of cash like you see in heist movies, but instead there was a collection of smaller vaults, different size safes with combination locks on them, and safety deposit boxes you could unlock with a key. Any cash or valuable inside belongs to specific people who know exactly what's inside. The vault door, it's the original from 1890, and it is substantial, locked every night.
And that door and its surrounding is 20 tons with steel and concrete. These doors are so old and the locks are so old on them, there is only 4 people in the country that can work on these locks.
How much that takes to shut it.
Bank employee Brent Zeckman demonstrated the careful ritual that is closing the vault door for the night. He braced himself and pushed with all of his body weight to swing this massive door shut. But then as he got it moving, he actually had to plant his feet and hang onto the handle of the steel door to slow that momentum and carefully close the vault door. Now, that door may weigh 20 tons, but it dates back to 1890. They've still got to be delicate with it. He spun the door handle around more than a dozen times to make sure the seal is tight. The handle is just like you'd picture on an old-time safe. It resembles a wheel of a ship with a circular center and 6 handles that stick out like spokes.
And that's every morning and every evening to open that and shut that.
Watching this ritual, we realize a break-in like you see in the movies, safe cracking with drills or explosions to open it would be impossible. The only successful robbery from a vault like this would have to be an inside job, a crime of convenience.
The thing with your dad, I mean, that had occurred on a Friday.
Yep.
And then, people did not return to the branch until Monday.
Yeah, Ted knew what he was doing. That's clear.
There's like an anecdotal story that the reason why now every single bank, every single employee who works there, regardless of what they're doing, has to be fingerprinted is because of my dad. Because it wasn't that they missed him or he somehow got out of it. It just was not a standard.
Not sure if it was all Ted or other things that contributed, but after this, security standards industry-wide were different. I'm Jen Picciano, and this is Dark Side of the Land. Before we left, the banker couldn't let the opportunity pass him by. He had to ask a burning question that's been largely left unanswered for those of us in Cleveland.
Not to pry too much, but I mean, when he did confess, did he give a reason?
Really, when it comes down to it, he needed to start over. I mean, like handsome guy, job, dating, friends, but that in general, his home life was really, really rough.
Okay.
And I think I think he would have left either way. I think that the money made it easier.
Because you wonder the motive, Was it just like, I'm going to prove I can do this, or was it? But no, that
I'm
makes
sure
sense.
there was probably a smidge of that, right? Like being a little bit cocky, but I very firmly believe that he would have left regardless and said, I just need to go and cut contact and start a new life somewhere. But it's so much easier to start over, to do anything if you have money.
Ashley sounds like she's given this a lot of thought.
I've had a couple friends work in banks, and when this all came out, they were like, who hasn't thought about that? I was like, I don't know, I've never worked in a bank. You guys don't have to answer. But they were like, I think everyone who works in a bank thinks about it at least once.
Now, we offered to let the security team that was watching our every move check our pockets before we left the bank, just in case it runs in the family. But they trusted us. We left the bank with a bolstered sense of fascination and intrigue, and Ashley felt closer to her dad. But our visit reignited burning questions that Ashley and her podcast partner, Jonathan Hirsch, worked so hard to answer. The question that a lot of people ask, too, that I don't think anybody has a real answer to is, what happened to the money?
Oh, Jonathan. This is Jonathan's big question.
I want an answer to this. We do not have an answer to that question. There's a world where he lived well, but not insanely well, without working for about 8 years, and the money just ran out. It doesn't really make sense. I'm sort of pulling together the threads that as we understand them, because it doesn't all add up.
He didn't live conspicuously at all. He had a nice apartment, but by the time he met Kathy in the late 70s, he was working.
It doesn't totally make sense, given his lifestyle, that he would have spent all that money. Now, he did later mention to Kathy that he had money and lost quite a bit of it in a real estate restaurant venture that he had invested in the 70s. It's a lot harder to trace that kind of money in that era, but I am absolutely convinced that he did not steal the equivalent of $1.8 million and spent it all over an 8-year period and maybe made some bad investments along the way. I just don't believe that that's what happened to all the money. I think there's more to the story.
Honestly, the worst secret he's kept for me is not even the secret of him being a fugitive.
Just before he died, Ashley and her mom discovered there was more he hadn't told them.
You know, there's things you kind of have to do that are not pleasant, but there's like paperwork and, you know, figuring things out. And I can remember my mom looking for his life insurance paperwork. She couldn't find it. She looked for like 2 or 3 days, and then he finally told her that he couldn't afford to pay his life insurance. He'd stopped paying it a year before. So my mom was left with a house with 2 mortgages on it, no life insurance. And that is the most heartbreaking thing for me, is that he kept that secret because he was afraid to tell her.
U.S. Marshal Pete Elliott says they're now studying the Conrad case to learn from it.
We actually took a look at this case and studied, my people did, is what we did, what we could have done. And I believe there's nothing we could have done except probably if we had a better exposure nationally, be able to put it out through major shows and major places that would want to put it out there in areas.
Elliott says Conrad did a lot right over the years to keep a low profile.
And what was consistent with Conrad, which he did under his Randele, he had an excuse. And we see this all the time. Throw it out to your audience out there, because we see it all the time. If they can't come up with their past, there's probably something wrong. There's people out here, and there's people living in Northern Ohio right now, I suspect, that have been fugitives for a number of years. And, we want those calls that are outlined at 1-866-4-WANTED. But look for those consistencies, people that can't come up with if you have an inkling that something's wrong, just a little bit of an inkling, there's probably something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Trust your gut.
Trust your gut, and just take a look at the people that can't come up with their past.
Jonathan kept describing Ted Conrad's story and backstory as an elegant one. Just as elegant as the Thomas Crown affair. Ashley, after spending time here in Cleveland and learning more about your dad, what are you going to take home from this?
Oh, that's a great question. I went into this with my eyes very open and prepared to, maybe learn some not great things about Dad, and to learn that the Tom that I knew, that his friends knew, was not the guy that people knew as Ted. Mm-hmm. And what I was thankfully blown away by was that everybody I've spoken to that knew Ted describes him exactly how Tom's friends do.
She said about her own podcast and this project, aiming to not let the name Ted Conrad eclipse Tom Randle's.
And I genuinely think that he was just like a scared kid who did something dumb.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that you want to fight now is that one day not defining your father's life. It might have defined Ted's life, but you don't want it to define Tom's life.
Exactly.
Is that fair?
Yes. I mean, the reason that it was so important for me to tell my story and to tell my dad's story is that I just refuse to let Tom Randele be erased by one day in Ted Conrad's life.
By no means should his crime be forgotten, she says. Ashley and Jonathan both think he was an unfocused young kid in search of a family, of stability.
I think if we strip away a lot of the mythology of Ted, I think we find a young man who wanted the life that he got when he became Tom. And he didn't feel like he could have it then when he was in Cleveland. And the money became a way to establish himself
A vehicle.
in another place, a way out, an answer. And it might seem crazy to us, myopic at least, to steal that much money and try to get away with it. But in a bizarre twist of fate, he did get away with it.
He believed
And
that he
what
could, and he did. I'm Jen Picciano, and this has been Dark Side of the Land. Subscribe now for future episodes and find more Dark Side of the Land and photo galleries related to these cases at cleveland19.com.